Hey, Chris Cantelmo here with another vibration. So I've been listening to and reading work by a couple of people involved in exploring the nature of consciousness and objective reality versus subjective reality. And those guys are Dr. Donald Hoffman from UC Irvine, who does some really interesting mathematical modeling of, he's attempting to make mathematical models of consciousness. I know that sounds crazy, but he's taken a pretty interesting approach, a very scientific approach. The beauty of mathematical models is that they're hard to argue with. And then there's another sort of, I guess, parapsychologist, Rupert Sheldrake. And it turns out that these guys have pretty similar conclusions about reality. And that is that consciousness precedes all other information in the universe. That consciousness is primary. And our notions of objective space-time, space and time are illusory. And I'll talk about this in another video. One of the really interesting things about these two guys is because Dr. Hoffman is able to weave in some pretty cool mathematics to describe the consciousness, the primariness of consciousness. He's lauded appropriately as a earthbound scientist, where Rupert Sheldrake, his ideas, which are essentially the same, or they're thinking very much along the same lines, but Rupert Sheldrake gets written off as a pseudoscientist. And it's too bad that happened. The fact that we let just the existence of an equation get in the way of the conclusions that can be drawn from any area of thought. But anyway, so you guys who have not heard of Rupert Sheldrake, you can check out a bunch of his interviews on YouTube, and Donald Hoffman has got a bunch of talks, TED Talks and other talks, super interesting stuff. And one of the overlap with the things that I've been thinking about, and that people who do DMT, what we all report, is that there's a much bigger reality out there. That when you go into the DMT space, you see the machinations behind what I considered just objective reality. And you see, wow, there's much more to it, and it's so much more intricate, and our perception is we're getting this information sort of projected at us by this world out there. And everyday serotonin-mediated existence just gives us just a surface representation. And what's fascinating about what Hoffman has done, he talks about that our visual system isn't giving us the best version of reality, the fullest or the most accurate version of reality. What it gives us is the version of reality that allows us to survive. And he's done mathematical models, basically evolution game theory, where he shows that if you take two similar entities, creatures, and one of them you say go out and perceive the most objective, which consciousness, which observer, or I'm not making myself clear. If you make two observers compete, one observer sees the outside world most accurately, the way it's set up by the experimenters. The other observer only reacts to fitness. And I'm not exactly sure how fitness is defined, and that's an important element here. But fitness is basically the ability to survive into the future. And apparently, when you run these simulations, like 100% of the time, and I guess this sort of makes sense, fitness for your environment, the ability to get the necessary rewards from your environment to survive, completely trumps objective and accurate view of the world. Like, there's no comparison. All the time, the observer that only observes things in a way to survive wins. So accuracy is it's moot. The evolution does not favor an accurate view of our environment. It favors a view of our environment that allows us to survive and procreate, pass on our genes. And the way that fits with one of the things that I was just so profound for me when I started doing DMT was the fact that you see this much larger world. So the realization that the everyday world we see is just a minor part of what's actually available to us. And the fact that that larger world is the world that I saw in childhood. And in some of the really big DMT experiences, you go even beyond that. So some people have criticized my suggestion that DMT is the neurotransmitter of childhood by saying, well, I don't remember my childhood being full of these, mind exploding trips. And I agree. But at lower doses of DMT, you can break into this beautiful, magical space that you're going to recognize as childhood. And again, because most people are doing DMT with their eyes closed in the dark, you're not availing yourselves of this view of the world that you're going to be just blown away when you do it. You just get outside and walk around, or even do it in your house and walk around with your eyes open. And you don't have to do a crazy amount that you can't be walking around and fully aware to experience. And when you do that, when you do the lesser amounts, this bigger, more beautiful world comes into perception, and it's magic. And it fits with this theory. In our childhood, we're being protected by our parents. That's kind of how it works. Parents have kids, they take care of their kids, protect them, and once they mature, they can take care of themselves. And for whatever reason, whoever created this world that we're in, whatever created this world that we're in, created a situation where children, while they're being protected and being nurtured, they're shown this much bigger version of reality that is just spectacular, so beautiful, so many more colors and entities and versions of living things. The trees and plants are so much more alive. And why that is, who knows? If there is and certainly there's the role of consciousness in the universe is becoming much, much more widely accepted. And the fact that there is a conscious creator or someone pulling the levers. That consciousness decided that kids, that youngsters, should get this bigger, more beautiful version of the world. And then as you age and mature, and your brain is being develops, as you approach maturity, where you're going to now be thinking about starting families of your own, the DMT production in your brain shuts off, and you go into the serotonin-mediated world, where only those features of that world that you need to survive and to procreate become paramount and become foremost in your perception. And that magical place that we were allowed to exist in as kids evaporates. And again, a number of people have said, challenging my idea that DMT is the primary neurotransmitter or a central neurotransmitter in childhood development, say they don't remember seeing sort of that magical place. They don't remember seeing ghosts or little monsters or anything. And maybe there are, well, I think there are reasons now that I think there are elements in our environment, man-made. Possibly, I'm not saying this is for sure, but there's a theory that like fluoride calcifies the pineal gland or somehow might inhibit the production of DMT, the normal production of DMT. And I think we're going to find out that in today's world, there's less DMT in the brains of children. But I remember as a kid, especially now that being reminded of it through DMT, of that magical world. And my two kids, when they were growing up, they saw imaginary things all the time. And anyone who has children, young kids, you know that they live in this, what we call an imaginary world, where kids have their little my ex-wife Dana, she had her friend Ghosty that she used to interact with. And I'm now convinced that Ghosty really did exist. And my kids, especially my younger son Harrison, he would carry on. When he was young, he would go into these elaborate orchestrations, and he was like this director of this whole cast of characters up in his room. And he would have all, he'd be playing with little figurines and things and setting up these virtual worlds. And my ex-wife Dana and I used to watch him, and he would be interacting with these, talking, just sort of muttering under his breath to all these other beings in the room. And we used to think, wow, what an incredible imagination this kid has. But I think he was actually interacting with these other real world entities that get enabled by DMT. And the thing about the perception of little kids is they don't understand that adults can't see what they're talking about. So I'm sure that Harrison figured that his parents could also see the little creatures that he was able to interact with. He just assumed we could see them too. And there are many times at night when he'd be going to sleep, or both my kids would be going to sleep, where they would get upset about something scaring them in their room. They were sure that there was somebody in the closet or something in the closet or under the bed. They saw something go under the bed. As an adult, you go in and you say, there's nothing under the bed, kid. Like, sorry. And they're like, no, it's under the bed. You look, it's over there. And you have to say, no, it really isn't. And I remember times now, thinking back, being outside, and the kids would say, what's that over there? By the bush. And I would look, and it'd be like, that's just a bush. And they're like, oh, it looks mean or something. And I would look at the bush and think, I don't think it doesn't look mean to me. And I think what was happening is the kids could see, like when you do DMT, in the bushes and trees, there are these things that get very can be sort of aggressive looking, because trees and plants, because they can't move, they have to be kind of almost like demon-like at times to scare away predators like us. So I think kids have access to that view of the plant world that makes some plants look demon-like. And so what would happen is, so kids would point out, hey, that like thing is scaring me over there, and you say, oh no, that's just a plant. That's just a plant, because the kid thinks you can see it too. And then when you say, no, that's just a plant, then the kid says, oh, okay, that scary demon-like thing is just a plant. And then, you can move past it. So, but really, it's just two different views of the world being described, because adults can't see the big picture that kids can see, and kids assume that adults can. And that fits very well with this concept described by Donald Hoffman that says that our perception of the world is not a perception of an objective reality. It's merely a perception of what's required of us in whatever evolutionary state we're in. And we are in a different evolutionary state as children when we're not directly involved in survival, where our parents are the main protagonists involved in our survival, than we are as adults. So why would it be? It wouldn't necessarily follow that kids and adults would have the same perception. And in fact, it sort of, I think, speaks volumes that kids and adults would be better off having different perspectives. If kids see a larger version of the world, so that as they grow up, they're able to adapt themselves to interact with the best version of the reality that they're going to be living in as they grow up, where adults, at a certain point, your adaptability sort of drops off. You become an adult, and then you go to this stripped down version of the world that allows you to survive. And it turns out the stripped down version of the world is a stripped down version. It's a more boring version of reality. And it's amazing to see this convergence that's now happening between the cutting edge of cognitive science and neurobiology and hardcore physics and quantum mechanics, and this, the whole notion of the fact that we can't get over this wave particle duality and non-locality, and how can something be in the same place, two different places at the same time, or how does quantum entanglement work? And what we're going to find out is that these things are confusing to our view of reality, because we're not seeing the bigger picture in which there is a world. There's a bigger world out there where dimensions exist, so that when we think that there is something that is in two different places at the same time, it isn't. It's one thing existing in a dimension